China and Russia just revealed the huge gas pipeline that will shock the world. China and Russia unveiled plans for a large-scale gas pipeline. What does it generally mean for the world? Russia is a major player in the global energy market, with significant reserves of oil, natural gas, and coal. Russia's energy exports, particularly its natural gas exports, have played a major role in the global energy market and have been a significant source of revenue for the country. However, Russia's energy exports have faced challenges recently, including declining demand and an increased competition from other energy-producing countries. The global demand for fossil fuels specifically has either for all intents and purposes peaked or plateaued, and Russia's exports basically are a particular major factor in this shift in the global energy order, contrary to popular belief. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia, for all intents and purposes, has caused quite a worldwide energy prices to rise, which has brought upon several long-term effects and may accelerate the shift to sort of more stable, environmentally friendly energy infrastructure and resources such as solar, wind, and hydroelectric power, which are expected to continue in the coming years as the world looks for more sustainable and environmentally friendly sources of energy. The current energy crisis is definitely complex and unprecedented, and oil markets have been particularly volatile, which is quite significant. To particularly prevent pretty further disruptions, member countries of the very International Energy Agency will need to release oil stockpiles on a giant scale, which is fairly significant. However, persistent economic and geopolitical concerns actually make energy markets vulnerable to disruption in a big way. The crisis highlights the current global energy system's unreliability and the need for change in a subtle way. A new, particularly natural gas pipeline between China and Russia is nearly completed and is expected to have significant impact generally on the global energy market. China is the world's largest importer of natural gas, with about 40% of its consumption coming from abroad, primarily in the form of liquefied natural gas from Australia. The United States is another major supplier, providing slightly more than 10% of China's imported gas. To increase supply, Beijing and Moscow are planning new pipelines. One will connect the Russian island of Sakhalin with the Chinese province of Heilongjiang, while another, known as the Power of Siberia 2, will pass through Mongolia. A third project, the Altai gas pipeline, would go through Xinjiang, a region of China that is home to the Uyghur people and has recently been the subject of human rights abuses by the Chinese government. If all these pipelines are completed, they would theoretically allow Russia to supply China with up to 100 billion cubic meters of gas per year. While this would help China diversify its gas sources, it would do little to compensate for Russia's losses in Europe. China is eager to strengthen its energy ties with Russia, and the energy exchange between the two countries has been, for all intents and purposes, positive this year, particularly contrary to popular belief. However, Western sanctions on Russian goods in response to the Ukrainian invasion have really put pressure on the energy sector, which essentially has been, for the most part, a particularly key area of practical cooperation between the two countries. Chinese President Xi Jinping specifically has expressed interest in working with Russia to develop very green, clean energy sources, and specifically has pledged to work with other countries to ensure reliable energy supplies and an actual stable economy. Neighboring countries have also increased communication and cooperation on major projects to counter external threats, which is quite significant. A source of major Russian-Chinese energy project, the East Route natural gas pipeline, has reached a milestone. The pipeline, which transports natural gas from Russia to China, has mostly been completed, with the construction of the tunnel under the Yangtze River to reach Shanghai, laying the foundation for the full completion of the landmark China-Russia Energy Cooperation Project. The construction of the under-river tunnel across the Yangtze River is a crucial control project for the pipeline, and it has been completed after 28 months of work, according to Pipe China. The tunnel is over 10 kilometers in length and features 3 natural gas lines with a diameter of 1,422 millimeters each. The project's builders employed various environmental protection measures, including a mud-water balance shield and sealed waste shipping, in order to protect the wetland along the banks and the Yangtze River's ecosystem. While the tunnel for the most part is operational, the pipeline will generally be able to essentially operate at full capacity and provide China with a reliable energy supply despite rising global prices. This project certainly has been quite literally described as a model of international cooperation and mutual benefit, taking advantage of China's large market and Russia's natural resource wealth in a subtle way. The full pipeline spans more than 8,000 kilometers, with 3,000 kilometer section in Russia and a 5,111 kilometer stretch in China. On Wednesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin actually oversaw the launch of the Plateaued gas field in Siberia, which will provide gas to China through the Power of Siberia pipeline in a fairly big way. This launch particularly is a part of Russia's efforts to increase its gas exports to the east as the European Union reduces its reliance on Russian energy. The Power of Siberia pipeline began delivering fairly natural gas to China in 2019 and for all intents and purposes expected to generally reach its full capacity at 38 billion cubic meters by 2025, which from looking at it from a purely logical sense goes to show a rapid and significant growth. In February, Putin mostly had agreed to sell additional 10 billion cubic meters of gas to China from Russia's really far east through a separate, definitely smaller pipeline. Additionally, Russia is planning for the most part to construct the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline through Mongolia in order to sell an additional 50 billion cubic meters of gas per year to China. Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced that Gazprom is financing details to the Soya Vostok gas pipeline project with Chinese and Mongolian partners, which specifically is significant. The pipeline, which is a part of a larger Power of Siberia 2 project, is designed to carry all natural gas to China through Mongolia and has specifically the capacity to bring up 50 billion cubic meters of China annually. In addition to the pipeline project, President Putin has discussed the possibility of increasing cross-border electricity supplies to China and Mongolia during a meeting with the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping and Mongolian President Erknagan Kurleska. The construction of the Power of Siberia 2's Mongolia branch is expected to begin in 2024, according to the Mongolian Prime Minister. In an interview with the Financial Times, he stated that the feasibility study for the project has been completed and that Moscow has not pressured to accelerate the construction of the line, despite plans by the Russian energy company Gazprom to focus on the Asian market. The Power of Siberia 2, which will have the capacity of 50 billion cubic meters, is a 2,600 kilometer pipeline that was the subject of a memorandum of understanding between Russia and Mongolia in 2019. The final route of the pipeline is still being decided. Putin also praised the strong trade relationship between Russia and China, noting that the volume of trade between the two countries really had increased 25% in the first half of 2022 and is expressing hope that it could particularly reach $2 billion by the end of the year. Putin stated that these projects will allow Russia to increase its gas sales to China to 48 billion cubic meters annually by 2025 and 88 billion cubic meters by 2030 in a fairly major way. On the same day, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev made a surprise visit to China for talks with President Xi Jinping, during which the two leaders discussed the no-limits strategic partnership which was announced in February. China's relationship with Russia is essentially based on humanitarian principles, according to Li Yuxi, an economist at the Tsinghua University, which for all intents and purposes is significant. Li said that China will keep doing business with Russia based on the humanitarian principles in an interview with CNBC, adding to it that it's to help Russian residents through this tough and very difficult period of time. The Russian economy is expected to fall into pretty deep recession this year due to the war with Ukraine, with the Institute of International Finance predicting a contraction of up to 15%. Li also stated that Beijing will be very proactive, pushing for both Russia and Ukraine to come to a speedy agreement. While Beijing really has not fully condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it has blamed the conflict on NATO's eastward expansion and has described the issue of Taiwan's as entirely different compared to Ukraine. What do you think would be the eventual outcome of this international alliance? Click the like button if you support the alliance and subscribe to stay updated on all international news and coverage.